Wonder of the Wasteland, Chapter 7. Adam's heavy slumbers were punctuated by periods when he half awakened, drowsily aware of extreme heat, of discomfort and sluggish pain, and of a vague sounds. Twilight had fallen when he fully awakened, stiff and sore, with a gnawing at his stomach and a parching of mouth and throat from thirst. He crawled out of the copse of arrowweed to the opening by which he'd entered it, and stealthily proceeding on to the road, he peered out and listened. No man in sight, no sound to alarm. Consciousness of immense relief brought bitterly home to him the fact that he was a fugitive. Taking to the road, he walked rapidly in the direction of the lights. He passed low, dark huts, somewhat black and back from the road, and he heard strange voices, probably of Indians. In about a quarter of an hour, he came to the river basin, where the road dropped down somewhat into the outskirts of Yuma. Most of the lights were across the river on the Arizona side. He met both Mexicans and Indians who took no apparent notice of him, and this encouraged Adam to go on with them down to a ferry boat. The boat was shoved off, and Adam saw that it was fastened to the cable overhead by ropes and pulleys. The current worked it across the river. Adam got out with the rest of the passengers, and leaving them, he walked down the bank a few rods. He found a little dock with a skiff moored to it, and here he lay flat and drank his fill. The water was full of sand, but cool and palatable. Then he washed his face and hands. The latter were swollen and stiff from the cactus thorns, rendering them clumsy. Next in order for him was to find a place to eat, and he came at once upon an eating house where several rough-looking white men and some Mexicans were being served by a Chinaman. When he ended this meal, he had determined upon a course to take. He needed a gun, he needed ammunition, a canteen, a burro, and an outfit, and he hardly expected to be able to purchase them after dark without exciting suspicion. All the same, he set out to look. A short walk brought Adam to a wide street, dimly lighted by the flare of lamps from open doors of saloons and stores. He halted in a shadow on the corner. A stream of men was passing, rugged, unshaven, dusty-booted white men and Mexicans, with their peaked sombreros and embroidered jackets and tight braided trousers. Presently, Adam ventured forth and walked up the street. The town resembled Picacho in its noisiest hours, magnified many times. He felt a wildness he could not see or hear. It dragged at him. It somehow made him a part of the frontier life. He longed to escape from himself. A glimpse of a tall man in black frock coat startled Adam. The coat reminded him of Collishaw. He steered down a side street into the gloom. He saw wagons and heard the munch of horses in stalls. Evidently, this place was a barnyard and might afford him a safe retreat for the night. The first wagon he examined contained straw. Climbing into it, he lay down. For a long time he lay there worrying over the risk he must run next day, until at length he fell asleep. When day dawned, however, Adam had not such overpowering dread. The sun was rising in red splendor, and the day promised to be hot. As it was early, but few people were to be encountered, and this fact lent Adam more courage. He had no difficulty in finding the place where he had eaten the night before. Adam ate as heartily as he could, not because he was hungry, but for the reason that he had an idea he might have to travel far on this meal. That done, he sallied forth to find a store where he could purchase the outfit he needed, and he approached the business section by a street that climbed to what was apparently the highest point in Yuma. Adam entered a store and almost forgot himself in the interest of the purchases he wanted to make. He needed a small mule or burro to pack his outfit, and while the storekeeper went out to get it for Adam, several Mexicans entered. And one of them recognized Adam. He cried out, "Santa Maria!" and ran out, followed by his amazed but less hurried comrades. It took Adam a moment to place the man in mind, Felix, the Mexican that had drawn a knife on Arrhenius. Therefore, Adam pondered he must take risks to get away with this necessary outfit. The storekeeper, who'd gone out through the back of the store, returned to say he could furnish a good burro ready to be packed at once. And Adam made a deal with him for the whole outfit and began to count out the money. The storekeeper didn't wait, and gathering up an armful of Adam's purchases, he carried them out through the back door. This gave Adam opportunity to have a look from the front door into the street. There strode Felix, gesticulating wildly to the white man Adam had seen before, the black-coated tall Kalashal, significant and grim with a white bandage over his face. A shock pierced Adam's heart, and it was followed by a terrible icy compression and then a bursting gush of blood, a flood of fire over all his body. Leaping like a deer, he bounded back through the store, out of the door, and across an open space full of implements, wagons, and obstacles. He had to run around or jump over. He didn't see the storekeeper. One vault took him over a high board fence into an alley, and through this he ran into a street. He headed for the river, running fleetly, blind to all around him, but the ground flying under his feet and the end of the street. He gained that. The river, broad and swirling, lay beneath him, plunging down the bank. He flew toward the dock. Upon reaching the dock, Adam espied a skiff with oars in place, with bow pulled up on the bank, on the sand. One powerful shove sent it with him aboard out into the stream. He bent the oars in his long, strong sweeps, and it took him only a few moments to cross. Not yet had any men appeared in pursuit or even to take notice of him. As he jumped out on the California shore of the river and began to run north, he found that he faced the lone black mountain peak which dominated the rise of the desert. The dust was ankle deep. It stifled him, choked him, and caked on his sweaty face and hands. He strode swiftly, oppressed by the dust and intolerant of the confining borders of yellow brush. The frequent bends in the road were at once a relief and a dread. They hid him and yet obstructed his own view. He seemed obsessed by a great passionate energy to escape. When he looked back, he thought of Kalashaw, of sure pursuit. When he looked ahead, he thought of the road, the dust, the brush into which he wanted to hide. By and by, he climbed and passed out of the zone of brush. He was on the open gravel ridges like the ridges of a washboard, up and down and just as bare. Yet, as a whole, there was a distinct slope upward. He could not see the level of the desert, but the lone mountain peak, close at hand, red and black and shining, towered bleakly over him. Adam derived satisfaction from the fact that the hard gravel ridges did not take imprint of his boots. Assured now that escape was in his grasp, he began to put his mind upon other considerations of his flight. He was not such a fool as to underrate the danger of his venturing out upon the desert without food, and especially without water. Already he was thirsty. These thoughts and counter ones pressed hard upon him until he surmounted the long slope to the top of the desert mesa. Here he looked back. First, he saw clouds of dust puffing up from the brush-covered lowlands, and then, in an open space where the road crossed, he espied horsemen coming at a gallop. Again, and just as fiercely, did his veins seem to freeze, his blood to halt, and then to burst into flame. Kalashaw and his men, gasped Adam, his jaw dropping. They've trailed me. They're after me on horses. This apparent fact was terrific in its stunning force. Adam reeled, his sight blurred. It was a full moment before he could rally his forces. Then, gazing keenly, he saw that his pursuers were still miles away. At first he ran fleetly, with endurance apparently unimpaired. But he meant to slow down and husband his strength as soon as he dared. Before him stretched a desert floor of fine, shining gravel, like marbles, absolutely bare of any vegetation for what seemed hundreds of yards. And then began to appear short bunches of low, meager brush called greasewood. And here and there isolated patches of ocotillo. These multiplied and enlarged in the distance until they looked as if they would afford cover enough to hide him from his pursuers. Hot, wet with sweat, strong and panting, he ran another mile to find the character of the desert changing. Reaching the zone of plant life, he soon placed a thin but effective barrier of greasewood and ocotillo behind him. Then he slowed down to catch his breath. Before him extended a vast hazy expanse, growing darker with accumulated growths in the distance. To the right rose the Chocolate Mountain Range, and it ran on to fade in the dim horizon. Behind him now stood the lone black peak, and to the left rose a low, faint, wavering line of white, like billows of a sea. This puzzled him until at length he realized it was sand. Sand, and it, like the range, faded in the distant horizon. He made the discovery that as he looked back over his shoulder, he was really looking down a long, gradual slope. Plainly, he could see the edge of the desert where he had come up, and often as he traveled along at a jog trot, he gazed around with fearful expectancy. He had imagined that his running had given rise to the breeze blowing in his face. But this was not so. A rather stiff wind was blowing straight at him. It retarded his progress, and little puffs of fine, invisible sand or dust irritated his eyes. Then the tears would flow and wash them clear again. With all his senses and feelings, there mingled a growing preponderance of thought or realization of the tremendous openness of the desert. He felt as though a door of the universe had opened to him, and all before him was boundless. He had no fear of it. Indeed, there seemed a comfort in the sense of being lost in such a vastness. But there was something intangible working in his mind. The wind weighed upon him. The coppery sky weighed upon him. The white sun weighed upon him, and his feet began to take hold of the ground. How hot the top of his head and his face! All at once the sweat appeared less copious and his skin drier. With this came a strong thirst. The saliva of his mouth was pasty and scant. He swallowed hard, and his throat tightened. A couple of pebbles that he put into his mouth mitigated these last sensations. Intelligence gave him pause then, and he halted in his tracks. If death was relentlessly pursuing him, it was no less confronting him than to the fore if he passed on out of reach of the river. Death from thirst was preferable to capture. But Adam was not ready to die. He who had loved life clung to it all the more fiercely now that the sin of Cain branded his soul. He still felt unlimited strength and believed that he could go far. But the sun was hotter than he had ever expected it. The heat appeared to strike up from the earth as well as burn down from above, and it was having a strange effect upon him. He'd sensed a difficulty in keeping to a straight line of travel, and at first had put it down to his instinct for zigzagging to his greasewood brush. As he climbed, Adam gazed up into the coppery sky, but his hot and tired eyes could not endure the great white blaze that was the sun. Halfway up, he halted to rest, and from here he had measureless views of the desert. Then his dull brain revived to a final shock, for he seemed to see 1,000 miles of green-gray barrenness, of lifting heat veils like transparent smoke, of wastes of waved sand, and of ranges of upheaved rock. How terribly it confronted him. Pitiless mockery of false distances on all sides, a sun-blasted world not meant for man. Then Adam ascended to the summit of the ridge. A glaring void seemed flung at him. His chocolate-hued mountain range was not far away. From this height, he could see all the gray-green level of desert between him and the range. He stared. Again there seemed flung in his face a hot glare of space. There was no river. Where's the river? Gasped Adam, mistrusting his eyes. But the wonderful Rio Colorado, the strange red river beloved by desert wanderers, did not flow before him, or to either side, or even behind. It must have turned to flow on the other slope of this insurmountable range. God has forsaken me, cried Adam in his despair, and he fell upon the rocks. But these rocks, hot as red-hot plates of iron, permitted of no contact, even in a moment of horror. Adam was burned to stagger up, to plunge and run and fall down the slope, out upon the level, to the madness that awaited him. He must rush on to the river, to drink and drink, to bathe in the cool water that flowed down from the snow-fed lakes of the north. Thoughts about water possessed his mind, pleasant, comforting, hurrying him onward. Memory of the great river made pictures in his mind, and there flowed the broad red waters, sullen and eddying and silent. All the streams and rivers and lakes Adam had ever known now crowded their images across his inward eye, and it was sweet. He remembered the brook near his old home, the clear green water full of bright minnows and gold-sided sunfish, how it used to flow swiftly under the willow banks where violets hid by mossy stones, and how it tarried in deep dark pools under the shelving rocks, green and verdant and sweet-smelling. How the ferns used to bend over in graceful tribute, and the lilies float white and gold with great green-backed frogs asleep upon the broad leaves. The watering trough on the way to school, many and many a time in the happy days gone by, had he drunk there and splashed his brother Gerd, who was afraid of water and hated it and had to be made to wash when they were boys. The old well on Madden's farm, with its round cobblestone walls, where the moss and lichen grew, and where the oaken bucket, wet and dark and green, used to come up bumping and spilling, brimful of clear cold water. How vividly he remembered that his father had called it granite water, and the best because it flowed through the cold subterranean caverns of granite. Then there was the spring in the orchard, sweet, soft water that his mother used to send him after, and as he trudged home, burdened by the huge bucket, he would spill some upon his bare feet. Yes, as Adam staggered on, aimlessly now, he was haunted more and more by memories of water, that dear, unforgettable time of boyhood when he used to love the water, to swim like a duck and bask like a turtle. It seemed so far back in the past, across some terrible interval of pain, and yet hateful. Where was he? And where was Gerd? Something like a blade pierced his heart. Suddenly Adam was startled out of his pleasant reminiscence by something blue and bright that danced low down along the desert floor. A lake! He halted with an inarticulate cry. There was a lake of blue water glistening exquisitely clear with borders of green. He could not help but rush forward. The lake shimmered, thinned, shadowed, and vanished. Adam halted and, rubbing his eyes, peered hard ahead, and all around behind him shone a strip of blue, streaked up and down by desert plants. And it seemed to be another lake, larger, bluer, clearer, with a delicate, vibrating quiver, as if it were exquisitely rippled by a gentle breeze. Green shores were marvelously reflected in the blue. Adam gaped at this. Had he waded through a lake? He had crossed the barren flat of greasewood to reach the spot upon which he now stood. Almost he was forced to run back. But this must be a deceit of the desert, a madness of his sight. He bent low, and the lake of blue seemed to lift and quiver upon a thin, darkling line of vapor or transparent shadow. Adam took 2 strides back, and the thing vanished in desert magic. A deception of nature, a horrible illusion to a lost man growing crazed by thirst. "Mirage," whispered Adam hoarsely. "Blue water, ha! Damn lie, it shan't fool me." But his clear perception failed. These mirages of the desert did deceive him. All objects took on a hazy hue tinged by the red of blood in his eyes, and they danced in the heat-veiled air. Shadows, glares, cactus, and brush stood as immovable as rocks of ages. Only the elusive and ethereal mirages gleamed as if by magic, and shimmered and moved in that midday trance of the sun-baked desert. The time came when Adam plunged toward every mirage that floated so blue and serene and mystical in the deceiving atmosphere, until hope and despair and magnified sight finally brought on a mental state bordering on madness. Then, as he staggered toward this green-bordered pond and that crystal blue lake, already drinking and laving in his mind, he began to hear the beautiful sounds of falling rain, of gurgling brooks, of lapping waves, of roaring rapids, of gentle river currents of water sweetly tinkling and babbling, of wind-laden murmur of a mountain stream. And he began to wander in a circle. End of chapter 7.